A moment for your body, take a moment for your mind, take a moment for your spirit, take a moment to be loved, take a moment to be healthy, take a moment when you pray, take a moment for worship, take a moment, every moment for your body, for your mind, for your mind, for your mind, for your spirit, take a moment to be loved, take a moment to stay healthy, to be happy, take a moment when you pray, take a moment for worship, take a moment to show you care, take a moment to show you care, just to show how much you care. Yeah.
Oh my everything for that. Welcome everybody to Healing Moments this evening, April 22nd. Today is Earth Day, so happy Earth Day, everybody. I would like to welcome those of us who missed us last week. Did you miss us? We missed you. We also missed all our panelists, Pastor Lucas, Dr. Dupuy, and our lovely Miss Sherry Sobers, who is joining us virtually. Sister Sherry, we miss you and we miss your presence with us. At this time, once again, we are still on the topic of temperance, and we would like to ask Pastor Lucas to pray for us. But before this, we'd like to welcome those of you who are joining us on YouTube. We ask you, as always, to share this information with everyone. Share with your friends, your neighbors, your co-workers, so that they all can share in this session of Healing Moments. Pastor Lucas.
Good evening to everybody. It's a delightful privilege and a pleasure to be with you again this evening. We will pray as we get going. Let us all pray, please. Our Father in heaven, we are thankful indeed for the opportunity that we can come together and share, discuss, explore. We ask your blessing, Lord, on all that we do, and may continue to be of benefit, of help to somebody. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. For devotional, we continue the theme as we were just hearing. We continue the temperance theme with a focus on self-control. There's a passage of scripture I want to share with you. It comes from 2 Peter, chapter 1. And it has in it a few verses, but I'll just take from verse 4. It says, though through these he has given us his precious and wonderful promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature, seeing that you have escaped the corruption that it is in the world caused by evil desires. For this very reason, you must make every effort to supplement your faith with moral character, your moral character with knowledge, your knowledge with self-control, your self-control with endurance, your endurance with godliness, your godliness with brotherly kindness, and your brotherly kindness with love. For if you possess these qualities and they continue to increase among you, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in attaining a full knowledge of our Lord Jesus, the Messiah. 2 Peter, an interesting passage, really. It speaks to something that I remember reading in history. When the Protestants left Europe and traveled to what they called the New World, many of them were fleeing persecution from Europe, religious persecution. But when they came to the West, it was new territory. Many things were not in place. They therefore had developed a practice, a principle called deferred gratification. Now, what's deferred gratification? It meant that satisfaction or what they hoped to achieve, they knew could not have been achieved immediately. So it was deferred, it was put back. It was a principle that applied to for them in terms of wealth, getting wealthy too. Um, they were quite prepared to sacrifice for the here and now for better later. Indeed, as time went by in what they called the New World, some started to go west because they heard of gold and other things, wealth and whatever else that they could acquire. Again, with the same principle of deferred gratification, many settled west with their animals, their wagons, their whatever else. And I remember there was a game that we used to play. I used to play called Oregon Trail. Um, Many left from over in the New York area and went to Oregon. That was a dangerous journey. Many died along the way and whatever else. But they did it because they believed that when they got where they want to get, they would have all the satisfaction and gratification that they wanted. We live in a time where people do not really cherish the value of deferred gratification. Um, Everything must be had now. And some take it further. If I don't get it now, I don't want it at all. Unfortunately for such people, there are some things that will not come now. There are some things that we have to wait for and work for. And self-control, one of the values I mentioned, comes in here. And this is what we're going to be talking about this evening, self-control. Sometimes we need to make some pretty stoic decisions in order to have a better life later. Some firm decisions have to be made in the earlier years. Deferred gratification, a similar principle. We'll study it this evening and look at the psychological aspect of it and we can see how it plays into our own human experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pastor Lucas. At this time, we would like to give a warm welcome to Sister Sherry Sobers, who will be speaking to us further on the topic of self-control as we speak of the topic of temperance. So, Sister Sobers, we would like to thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lori. And thank you for the warm welcome. I really missed you and I missed you guys. And I miss Pat also to those who are watching. You know, we figure only 1 week, but imagine the distance that the week created with us. So yes, we are talking about temperance. And specifically today, we are talking about self-control. I just want to recap a little bit about the definitions that I would have shared about on temperance in the first week. We spoke about temperance being the moderation of action, thought, and feeling. It's not just, sometimes when we think about temperance, we just think that it refers to not eating or drinking certain things, but it is a little bit it is much more than that. It is moderation in or abstinence from the use of alcoholic beverages or certain foods and stuff like that. But it is moderation in action, thought, or feeling, a restraint. And I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. It is also the habitual moderation in the indulgence of the appetites or passions. Again, we're going to talk about that later. So generally, it's defined by control over excess. So that temperance has a lot of classes, branches, or as I would call them, extended family members. So with the thought and the concept of temperance, you also hear words like abstinence, chastity, modesty, humility, prudence, self-regulation, forgiveness, mercy, and obviously self-control. And all of these, if we check all of the meanings of all of these words, they all involve a restraint of some kind of impulse, It could be a sexual desire. It could be vanity. It could even be anger, because when we talk about passions, that's what we talk about when we're referring to anger. And to find it very interesting, the Greek word is best translated by the word mastery, which indicates full control over the self and the things that you may desire, which also include the physiology, psychology, and morality. Now, think about it. When we were created, we were not only created to be in control of our environment, but we are also created to control our choices. And to know that you have control over your choices, it's really, really challenging. But the thing is, we were born with the ability, we were created with that ability to control. Now, realizing and even more importantly, believing this creates it helps us to balance our physical as well as our mental health. Having self-control is a God-given sense to use all that he has given us as he directs in the right way. But the real challenge, and I know we will all agree, the real challenge is that sometimes our appetites and our desires take control over us. But we have to remember control of self, whether it is in what we eat, whether it is in what we drink, whether it is something sexual, it could even be sports. And now you're thinking about sports, I came across a very interesting study when I was doing the research on self-control. And when we think about self-control, it is the ability, we know that, the ability to master or to command ourselves, as well as to make ourselves work hard and behave in a particular way without needing anyone else to tell us what to do and how to do it. The mastery of self. Now, going back to this study that I found, and the two researchers from Australia, they assigned the volunteers to a 2-month program of physical exercise, a routine that required a lot of willpower. At the end of the 2 months, would you believe it? Participants who had stuck with the program did better on a lab measure of self-control than participants who were not assigned the exercise regime. So even with exercise, that helps to boost our self-control. So the bigger question to us today is, how do we maintain and improve self-control? I'm going to give you 2 ways that we can do that. And then as usual, I'll end with my quote. So, avoiding temptation is obviously one effective way to maintain self-control. And again, there's an interesting study called the marshmallow study. Children who stared directly at as a marshmallow were less likely to resist it than students who closed their eyes, or they turned away, or they otherwise distracted themselves. The out of sight, out of mind principle applies to adults as well. One recent study, for instance, found that office workers who kept candy or sweets or some kind of treat in a desk drawer indulged less than when they candy in plain sight. And the second and another helpful tactic for improving self-control is a technique that psychologists call an implementation technique. Usually these state the if then statement. So if something happens, then I will do something else. So for example, and it helps to curtail or hinder any way that we may want to lash out or anything like that. So for example, if you're, for example, watching your sugar intake and you were invited to dinner at a person's home, or you were invited to a restaurant or something like that, you ask yourself, if given the option to have dessert, for example, then I will do something. So you make up in your mind beforehand, this is what I'm going to do. If I'm offered dessert, then I will take a fruit salad. You're still giving yourself the option. Research among adolescents and adults has found that people who use this implementation aspect, they improve self-control because they realize that you still have options. Even amongst those persons where you did not have a strong willpower, the idea is that you feel that you have more options. Having a plan in place ahead of time allows you to make decisions in the moment that without drawing away from your willpower. It's always good to go prepared, always good to go with a plan. So, as I said, my quote for today: willpower is not genetic. It requires the will to resist and the power of a resolved mind. Again, willpower is not genetic. It requires the will to resist whatever temptation, whatever passion, whatever issue, whatever it is, the will to resist and the power of a resolved mind. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your interaction and questions later on in the program.
Thank you very much, Sister Sherry. So I hope you all have listened and you all are preparing your questions. At this time, we're just going to take a quick break before we listen to Dr. Corinthia Dupie.
Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be loved. Take a moment to be healthy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment every day. Take a moment for your body. Take a moment for your mind. Take a moment for your spirit. Take a moment to be loved. Take a moment to be happy. Take a moment when you pray. Take a moment for worship. Take a moment to show you care. Take a moment to show you care. Just to show how much you care. Yeah.
Turn on the speaker on your computer. You have to introduce me, Lori. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us again this evening as we continue the theme of temperance. Last week before last, we talked about overworking. First, we had talked about how do you know when you had enough to eat. So we talked about temperance in eating. And the following week, we talked about temperance in working. And some people were even scared to listen to it because they're so guilty of overworking. I myself had to decide not to go back to the office after that session. So I learned from it as well. Today, we're going to have a small debate. So I will need you to participate. And that is debating the question about how doctors should try to get their patients or their clients to stop smoking. There is no doubt that smoking is an unhealthful habit. And so what we have tried to do as doctors is to target what we call health behaviors. So what doctors and clinic nurses and nurse practitioners and nurses and nurse educators try to do is to target the health behaviors of the individual. And that has to do with the patient's beliefs and actions, which will have some impact on their health. So how do we go about it? The CDC and the WHO and the Barbados National Registry and all of your national registries try to take an approach where we collect evidence. So we collect the numbers of people smoking, the age groups, this different populations, etc. And we try to get information on how many people smoke, and then we try to put in place different measures to prevent them from smoking. So the things we do, for example, there are some hospitals or health clinics where every time a patient comes in, the doctor must ask them about their smoking habits or their drinking. Do you smoke? If the patient smokes, every time they come in, the doctor will talk to them of the dangers of smoking. And others of us, we have tried various means. We have tried posters and banners and health marches and health talks, the mobile phone intervention and internet intervention, and various other means. We have tried banning smoking in certain places. We have raised taxes on cigarettes and other forms of tobacco. We have tried nicotine patches. We have tried even medication, because we tend to see smoking as a disease. We even call it tobacco dependence, as if it is something like pneumonia or influenza or hepatitis. And so we tend to target our interventions to changing the person's health behavior, not necessarily behavior on a whole, but their health behavior. So we try to see if we can, sometimes we try to frighten them. So in the US, Australia, Philippines, for example, there are warnings on cigarette boxes. And in Australia, they are quite graphic. So for example, they will have someone with terrible teeth on the package, or even lip cancer. They will have an eye, a big eye that presumably cannot see, and they will say that smoking causes blindness. They will have a nice little baby and say, don't let your baby breathe cigarette smoke. Or they will show you somebody with circulation problems and try to convince you that smoking is going to cause circulation problems. And of course, the most dreaded of all, lung cancer. So you see the ads on TV where they have somebody 39 looking like 93, and they have a tracheostomy, and they have to put their hand over it to talk. And they're very thin, and their hair is thinning. And so we've tried various things. But there isn't, I doubt that there is a smoker in the world, unless it's a child smoker, who is not acquainted with all of the dangers of smoking and all of the poisons in smoking, the nicotine and the benzenes and the tar and what they can do in the lungs. I've had a police assistant who assists me sometimes at autopsies, and he would be in there and he'd see the lungs and he would say, that's a smoker, I need to get a picture so that I can show to my children. And we use all of those things, but do those things work? Is there another method that we can use? Can we stop, can we change from the manager method, the know-it-all method, and try to convince the patient that it is for the greater good, not just for health, but for the good of society? Can we try to change the patient's idea of virtues? Should we teach them temperance as a virtue in itself and try to get them to stop smoking that way? In order for that to work, it's possible that it can work, but in order for that to work, there has to be some kind of common understanding between the patient and the health educator. In other words, they both have to have the same ideas of virtue and temperance and good. And so unless the conversation takes place where the two people have the same idea of what is good and what is right, it probably isn't going to happen. So the question that I want to put out to you, and I would like your views on, is whether doctors should moralize to their patients, whether they should try to get abstinence in their patient by trying to teach them what is right or what is good or what is virtuous. Should they approach it from a moral issue, or should they approach it from a physical and physiological health issue? So that's what I want to put out there for you. I want you to remember our definition of temperance. Some people say that temperance is use everything in moderation. Our definition of temperance, and when I say our, I mean we, the team at Good News Community SDA Church, our definition of temperance is moderate use of what is good and total abstinence from what is bad. And so is it our duty as doctors, and I'm not looking at it from the point of view of Pastor Lucas as a pastor or a theologian or a moral man, I'm looking at doctors, knowing that we have tried everything. Should we now change our approach to a moral approach when we are dealing with things like abstinence? So I'm not a philosopher, but I'm just throwing it out there and hoping that some of you will be able to weigh in and give your ideas or ask the questions that can lead to the answers that you are looking for. So thank you for being here, and we hope you will always be with us at 6 p.m. on Thursdays as we look into the various aspects of health, especially with respect to mental health. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dupi. At this time, do you all have your questions ready? Do you all have your suggestions? Do you all have your feedback as it relates to the question Dr. Dupi asked? Do you think that doctors should take a different approach in terms of having a more moral approach to certain questions of temperance? Let us recap. Sister Sherry spoke about self-control and some of the steps that can be taken to help us practice self-control. Let me repeat her quote, which says, willpower is not genetic. It requires the will to resist and the power of a resolved mind. So we have a question here. Good evening, Sister Rochelle Haynes. It says, looking at it from a moral standpoint may possibly have a better effect, since after all the information available, people still choose to smoke because no one ever thinks they can be affected negatively. What do we all think about that?
Do we really think that do we really know the reason why people choose to smoke? Actually, the people who choose to smoke have various reasons. People sometimes tend to start smoking because of peer pressure, or they went to a club and everybody else was smoking. I remember looking at a series that was filmed in 1963, and everybody in that series was smoking. Doctors, men, women, police, firemen, farmers, everybody except the children smoked. And so at that time, smoking was the in thing, and it wasn't only the in thing, it appeared glamorous because the smoking ads used to have women on the box, and especially some particular brands, which I won't mention, um, promoted it as a sign of women's liberation. And one of them said, "You've come a long way, baby." Meaning that, you've gained your independence and you no longer need men to tell you what to do, and it's not a man thing, etc. So once upon a time, it was a glamorous thing to do. It was socially acceptable, and not even acceptable, it was a desirable thing to do. Some other people started to smoke. I have a friend who started to smoke when he went to study in Cuba, and he smoked for about 7 years, and then he just quit cold turkey. Now, we all know that smoking is a very addictive. Nicotine is very, very addictive. It is actually one of the most addictive substances on earth. And so once people begin to smoke, it is very, very difficult for them to stop. And even, when I was studying pathology, I was surprised that there were a couple of pathologists who smoked. Of all the people who shouldn't smoke, it should be a pathologist, because you always see in the inside of people and you can see what the smoke does. But these people started smoking from young or in medical school, when the pressure was on. So the people who smoke tell you that it makes them feel good. And it not only makes them feel good, it helps them to relieve stress. And so whenever they want more, or they feel stress, and sometimes the feeling of the stress is the addiction itself, they get a cigarette and it calms them. We never teach the how do you call it, the benefits of smoking. We don't generally teach our patients the benefits of smoking. We as doctors know probably maybe a couple of benefits of smoking. It is supposed to be protective against ulcerative colitis, but how many people have ulcerative colitis? And some doctors believe that it's protective against Parkinson's. But, and the people who stop smoking say it makes them put on weight because they eat more. So they think of smoking as a means of staying slim. But, that's probably a poor excuse. So it's very difficult to stop smoking. So, but approaching it from the moral standpoint may not always be viable, because it will take a longer time. We as doctors tend to see patients in 15 minutes. When we have a clinic, it's like a conveyor belt. They come in and they go. In order for us to approach it from a moral standpoint, we're going to have to need more time. We're probably going to have to spend, we're definitely going to have to spend more time speaking to our patients so that we can come to an agreement, because otherwise we will be seen as, we're not even the manager now, we'll probably be seen as a preacher or as God. And so that's going to be a difficult thing to manage.
What I would like to input, though, is a lot depends on what the person is receptive to. Some patients or some persons will be receptive to a moral approach. Others may be receptive to an educational approach or whatever approach. But it all depends on what the person is receptive to. If the moral approach is offensive to them, you better leave it out. It's not going to work. Along with that, what I want to say also is that sometimes the smoking issue or drinking issue is deeper than education. some people have reached the point of addiction, and moral persuasion and education hardly will work. They would need a therapeutic approach. Someone to work with them through the process and all that's involved. Maybe put them on some type of program and gradually work towards getting rid of the addiction. So the approach depends a lot on, where the person is at, what's going on with them in terms of that particular problem.
If I may weigh in as well.
Okay. Yes, go ahead, Sister Cheryl.
Because I quite agree with what Pastor Lucas said in terms of where the patient, quote unquote, is at. Added to that, there may be a sense, not only addiction, but there may be a denial. So you may have a situation where some person has a definite predisposition to drunkenness and drinking, but for them, they figure, I can hold my liquor, as they would say. So they are in denial, and they have not come to the realization of what can happen. And sometimes it is unfortunate that this happens after something tragic, a real misfortune. So added to the addiction aspect, there is also, or incorporated into it, is also the denial aspect of it. Along with that, I found the ending of your presentation quite interesting, Dr. Dupree, because, I don't know if in medical conferences now there is that added moral aspect, or if it has always been there. But one of the realities of it, and not to philosophize it, is to look at the right. You spoke earlier about good versus bad. So what is good, what is bad? Again, philosophy. I'm not a philosopher, but again, those are the questions that you have to consider when you're talking about this whole aspect of temperance and good versus bad, and abstinence, and all of those catchphrases that we so often encounter when we are dealing with moral issues like this. That's it, just for me.
Since we're on this, how, as a counselor, would you advise someone who is either in denial or who has acknowledged they have this problem? What steps would you advise to take to get out of that behavior?
Well, firstly, as a counselor, our aim is not to advise so much, but to bring our client to a realization of what the issue is. So if the client is not in a position, has not admitted within themselves that they have the problem, I would try to use various ways to maybe scenarios, looking at what could possibly happen. But the idea is that unless the client is at the stage where he or she has recognized, I have a problem. Say, for example, this person has recently gotten into an accident because, or maybe they didn't get into an accident. Say that the person almost got into an accident, or something could have happened to a child because of their neglect, because they were so wasted, as it were, with alcohol, or if maybe they were smoking and the child inhaled the fumes and the child is asthmatic. Suppose something like that happened, and then the person noticed, I need help. Oh yeah, we can work with that. There are various techniques, various strategies that you can work with, depending on depending on how it suits the scenario. But for someone who is in denial, that person probably doesn't even want to have a counselor bring that to the fore, and therefore they could be very well resistant to any to opening their eyes to realizing that this is a problem. So it all has to do with the client at the stage where they can acknowledge, I have a problem, I need to get it fixed, it's beyond me, I need help.
Mr. Haynes is asking, how about using a combination of the three components, a physical, moral, and addiction approach?
And that's why it involves getting to know your patient. Your patient always has the freedom to choose somebody else. But if you all can come to a common approach, and so that's why it involves spending more time than the usual, you know, how you doing today? Do you have any pains? And but in a stethoscope, it will involve a much deeper relationship, even a friendship, as described by a particular author that I read on when I was preparing that topic recently. And it's in the Journal of Medicine and Philosophy, which is why it is so philosophic. The author is Kyle Karches from St. Louis University, St. Louis, Missouri. And he basically, well, it's philosophy, so he basically argues the topic of which one will work. But unless the person sees not smoking as a virtue, it will be very difficult to convince a patient. I know of people who every time they see somebody with a cigarette, they say, boy, you still smoking, boy, throw that cigarette away. You know, if I get that cigarette, I'll throw it away. And that has no effect at all until the disease comes on. So we really have to try a different approach. If we can't get everybody to give their lives to Christ and so get that help to stop smoking, we have to try and develop a type of friendship where we can be heart to heart and come to this agreement on what is right versus what is wrong. And that so it has to be a combination, because as you know, as Rochelle is saying, and as I'm thinking, everybody isn't going to accept the moral approach and the virtue approach and the temperance approach. For some people, that's going to work. For other people, it's going to be counseling therapy. For other people, it's going to be medication. You may actually have to give them some drug that is going to make them ill when they smoke. Or you're going to have to switch them around and slowly make them give up by using a nicotine patch or an electronic cigarette or some kind of effect like that. And then there are other people who you can scare by using the picture or bringing them into the autopsy room even, so they can see the lung cancer for themselves. You know, so I guess it's knowing your patient and tailoring your approach based on the type of relationship you have built with the patient.
Pastor Lucas, before we close, any final words on this topic?
Well, I support much of what has been said. One really has to be aware of, the particular person's situation in a very acute way. Education is useful. We do a lot of education in the church. Education brings the knowledge, not necessarily the power to get out of the habit. Some people have to be empowered. Then a person, she was addressing denial. A person needs to be in a place where they actually want help. Because if a person doesn't want help, you cannot help them. Right? So the help has to be needed and requested. Because between the individual, whether it be a doctor or therapist or counselor, whoever it happens to be, there has to be the attitude of cooperation. Both have got to be working together. But these habits that have got out of control can be controlled. It's the reason, Jesus, at least in the book of Peter, it's mentioned there self-control as one of those virtues that we need to have in life. Mm-hmm. So if for you are having some problems with self-control, it's a choice. And then, working it through consistently until you've been able to get that control, whether it is cigarette smoking, it is alcohol, it is work, it is whatever it is. Self-control is a virtue, and God works with us to develop that self-control. Won't come overnight, but with God's help, we can overcome and have that self-control that's so necessary for living.
All right. Thank you very much for these words, Pastor Lucas. At this time, as we close, we would just like to thank everyone who joined us. Thank you for your questions, as always, Sister Haynes, and everyone else who has joined us here on Zoom and on YouTube. We would just like to inform everyone that next week we will not be joining you all, but remember that you can also always view our videos on YouTube at the Good News Community Seventh-day Adventist Church YouTube channel. And don't forget, you can join us in person at Oldbury now that we are no longer on lockdown and churches are open once you set an appointment, I believe. So you can join us at the Good News Seventh-day Adventist Community Church at the Oldbury Conference Center in St. Philip. And join us next month on May 6th for Healing Moments. What topic will we be covering next month?
I don't recall that right now, but
I think it's addiction, so some of those aspects will come back again. Okay. We will have several sessions on addiction itself as a disease process or as a moral, mental issue.
So thank you everybody for joining, and join us next month, May 6th, on Healing Moments.
Take a moment for your body, take a moment for your mind, take a moment for your spirit, take a moment to be loved, take a moment to be healthy, take a moment when you pray, take a moment for worship, take a moment every day, take a moment for your body, take a moment for your mind, take a moment for your spirit, take a moment to be loved, take a moment to be happy, take a moment when you pray, take a moment for worship, take a moment to show you care, take a moment to show you care, just to show how much you care.